Appendix B, Federal Railroad Administration track safety standards. Track safety standards scope of part application responsible of track owner designation of qualified persons to supervise certain renewal inspection tracks, classes of track, operational speed limits, restoration or renewal of track under traffic coordinate conditions, measuring track and underloaded civilian pound. See exemptions, alignment curves, elevation, speed limitations, elevation of curved track runoff, curved data in class 4 through 4 track surface scope, ballast, general ballast, disturbed track, cross ties, defective rails, rail mismatch, rail batter, continuous welded rail joints, tie plates, rail anchor, track spikes, track shims, flanks used in shimming, churning out, shorting, track crossing generally, switches, frogs, springs, rail frogs, self-guarded frogs, frog guard rail, and guarded faces. Track appliances, track related devices, scope, derail, switches, heaters, subpart F, inspection, track inspection, switch, track, crossing inspection, inspection of the rail, special inspection of records, maximum allowable operation speeds of curved track. Appendix B, schedule of civil penalty, section 302, 309, B4 Statute 971 97.5 Title 47 or Title 45 U.S. Standard Code of 431-438 Section 14C9 the regulation of the Office of Secretary of Transportation of Title 49 Code Federal Registry 149 source of 36 Federal Registry 20336 October 20th 1971 otherwise noted. 213 subpart A general. This part is scope of the part. This part prescribes a little minimum of safety requirements of railroad track. This is partly general railroad system and transportation requirements prescribed in the part applied to specific track and conditions existing to isolation and combination of track conditions of the individual amounts of deviation from the requirements of the parts require remedial to provide the safe operation of over the track. 213 application except for the provided paragraphs B and C and this part of D applies to all standard gauge tracks and general railroad systems of transportation. This part does not apply to the track located inside the installation, which is not as part as general railroad systems of transportation. Use exclusively rail, transmit, commuter, and other short haul parent passenger services, metropolitan suburban areas. Until 1972 subparts A, B, and D, and except for 213-109 E and F, and of the part of do not apply to the track constructed under the construction before October 15, 1971, until October 1973 subpart C and 213-109 subpart D do not apply to the track construction under the construction before the October 15, 1971. Responsibility track owners, any owner of the track in which they part applies to them. We know to the notices the track does not comply with the requirements of these parts should bring the track to compliance. Halt all operations over the track if the owner track which is part of the implies responsibility for another person to buy and lease the otherwise or any other part or assignment and petition Federal Railroad Administration to recognize the persons that are responsible to assign the purpose of the compliance with the part of each petition must be in writing, including the following: the name of the address of the track owner and the name of the address of the person to responsibility is aligned and assigned. Statement of exact relationship between the track owner and the assignee, the precise identification of the track, statement of the competence-ability of the assignee and carry out of the duties of the track owner under this part. A statement is signed by the assignment of the knowledge assignment of the responsibility of the purpose compliance within this part. If the administrator is satisfied with the assignee, the competent and able to carry out the duties and responsibilities of the track owner under this part of this grant petition subject conditions are deemed necessary, and if the administrator grants a petition of this under this section, he shall notify the owner assignee and the administrator that grants petitions may be hold and track owner is assigned as both the responsibility for compliance with this part is subject to the penalties under 213 and 15. 213.7 designation of qualified persons to supervise certain renewals and inspection. Each track owner of which which this part applies to designate qualified personnel to supervise restoration renewals of track under the track conditions. Each person designated must have at least 1 year supervisor experience in the railroad track maintenance, or a combination of supervisor experience in track maintenance and training from the course of in the track maintenance from the college level education of the program and related to the track maintenance demonstrated to the owner and that he knows the understanding of requirements of this part, can effective deviations from those requirements, and can be prescribed appropriate remedial action and correct the safely compensation of the deviations. Writing in the authorization from the track owner to prescribe remedial actions to correct the safely compensation deviations requirements in this part. Each track owner, which is part applies to the designation qualified personnel inspecting of the defects. Each person designated must have at least 1 year experience in the railroad track inspection, combination experience in track inspection from course of track inspection from a college level educational program related to a track inspection, demonstrated to the owner that he or knows or understands the requirements of this part, can be deactivate deviations of those requirements. He prescribes appropriate remedial section of the correct safety component, compensates the deviations. Written authorization from the track owner to prescribe remedial actions to correct safely compensate the deviations of the requirements of this part, pending on the review of the qualification person designated under the paragraph of this section within the respective designation under the paragraphs A, B in this section. Each track owner must be maintained written records. Each designation is in effect at the base of each designation, and track inspection may be each designation qualified and required at 213-241, and this record must be kept available for the inspection of copying Federal Railroad Administration during the regular business hours. Title 34 FR 20336, October 20th, 1971, amended at 38 FNR 875. January 5th, 1973, 213, class of track operating speed, except for provided in paragraphs B and C in this section of 213.857, 213.59, 213.105, 213.113. And A and B in 213.137 B and C, the following maximum allowable operating speed apply over the track mortals and all required maintenance prescribed in this form, and maximum allowable operation speed from the freight trains to the maximum allowable operation speed in perimeter and trains, class 1 10 215, class 2 25 30, class 3 40 and 60, class 4 90 and another 60 and to 90, class 5 60 80 to 90, class 6 210 to 110. If the segment does not meet at all requirements for it, it's intended it has reclassified the next lowest class of track for which it does not meet all the requirements that this part. However, if it does not at least meet the requirements of the class 1 track, no operations may be conducted over the segment except as provided 213.11, maximum operation speed not exceed 110 without prior approval of Federal Railroad Administrative petitions for approval must be filled within the manner and containing information required in 211-11 of the chapter. If the petition must be provided in sufficient information concerning the performance and characteristics of trackage signals and graded cross protection, trespasser control within appropriate equipment involved, and also concerning maintenance and inspection practices, procedures followed, and to establish that they propose and sustain in safety. 36 and 20336, October 1971, amended in 38 FR 875 and January 5th, 1973, 38 and 23045, August 30th, 1973, 213, restoration of renewal of track under track conditions and during the period of restoration, renewal trackage and under the traffic conditions and does not meet all the requirements prescribed in these parts, that work or operations of track must under the continuous supervision of person designated in 213.7. 213.13, measuring track not underloaded. When unloaded track is measured to determine compliance within the requirements of this part amount of the rail, and if any movement occurs and the track is loaded into the added measurement of the unloaded track. 38 FR and 575, January 5th, 1973, 3. 213 by 115 civil penalty of any owner applied to which this part applies to person held by Federal Railroad Administrator to be responsible. 213.5 within violations of any requirement prescribed in this part were subject to the civil penalty at least $250 but no more than $2,500. For the purpose of this section, each day of the violation persists shall be treated in separated offenses. 213.117 any owner of the track in which that applies to the petition of Federal Railroad Administration exception from all requirements as prescribed to this part. Each position exemption in section is filled in with the manner containing the information required at 211.11 of this chapter. The administration finds the exemption of the public interest and consistent with the railroad safety and must be granted. The exemption subject to the condition of the he deems as noticeable exemption of granted is published in Federal Railroad stated together in the statement as of the reasons of thereof. Subpart B. Roadbed scope. The subpart prescribes minimum requirements of the roadbed and areas immediately adjacent to the roadbed drainage and each drainage other than water carrier facility under the immediately adjacent roadbed must be maintained and kept free of obstruction. Accommodated accepted in water flow for the areas concerned. Vegetation and railroad property which is immediately adjacent to the roadbed must be controlled so that it does not and becomes a fire hazard to track and carrying. Structures obstruct visibility of railroad signs and signals, interfere with the railroad employees performing normal trackside duties, preventing the power function and signal communication lines, and preventing railroad employees from visual inspection and moving equipment from their normal duties in the station. Track geometry 213 and 61. So the subpart prescribes and requires to gauge the line and the surface of the elevation, outer rails, and speed limitations and curved track. Gauge 213 and 53. Clean and is measured between the heads of the rails and right angles rails in plane 5/8 of an inch and the top of the rail bed. Gauge must be even within the limits prescribed as following. Class 1 of the tracks, and I'll zoom in on that. The tangent A, the gauge of the track must be at least 4/8 of an inch, but more than 4/9 of an and 4/9 pretty much in a quarter, and at least 4/8 of an inch, but not more than 3/8, 4/9 and a quarter for 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 and 6. Just the alignment may not be deviated informatory more than the amount of prescribed in the following table. Chapter 2 Federal Railroad Administration tangent. The deviation of the mid-effective from 63 feet line may not more than class 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Deviation mid-orient of 63 foot chord may not be more than the track tangent. Deviation 62 foot line and 62 foot chord is 6 feet by 5 or 6 inches by 5 inches, 3 inches by 3 inches, 1 and 3/4 by 1 and 3/8 or 5/8, 1.5. Well, 1 by 1 inch. I can't read the edges of them, so this end of the line must be at the points of the gauge side at the line at 5/8 of an inch is below the top of the railhead. Either the rail may be used in line rail. However, the same rail must be used for the full length of tangential segment of the track. This ends of the chords of the points of the gauge side outer rail 5/8 of an inch below the top of the railhead. 213.57 curve elevation speed limitations except for the provided by 213.63 outside rail of the curve may not be lower than inside of have more than 6 inches in elevation and maximum allowable operation speed of each curve in determining the following formula. The V and equal to the square root of EA plus 3 parentheses divided by 7 10,000ths of A. Maximum allowable operation speed in miles per and equal to the maximum allowable operating speed. E is actual elevation outside the rail, and inches. D is the degree of curvature in degrees. Appendix A is a table of maximum allowable operation speed computed in accordance with the formal variation elevations of degree of the curvature. Now, there's the track surfaces, and I'm going to go back up to the top. 213 elevation of the curved track runoff. If the curve is elevated in full elevation must be provided throughout the curve, and unphysical conditions do not permit elevation runoff occurs in curve and the actual minimum elevation. It must be used in computing the maximum allowable operation, the speed cover in 21357. Elevation and runoff, it must be at the uniform rate within the limits of track surface deviation prescribed in 21363 must be extended in at least full length of spirals and physical conditions do not permit in spiral long enough to accommodate minimum length of runoff and part off the runoff and tangent. Curve data for the classes 4 and 6 track. Each owner of the track in which the part applies shall be maintained at a record and curve of class 4 and through 6, and the record must be containing the following information: location, degree of the curvature, designation, elevation, designated length of the elevation runoff, minimum allowable operation speed. Track surface. Each owner of the track in which the part applies is also maintaining the surface of which track which is within the following table. The runoff at 31 feet at rail of the end of the may not be more than 3 1/8, 1 in class 1, 2, 3 inches, 3 and 2 and 3 in class 3, class 4 1 1/2, class 5 1 inch, and class 6 I'm guessing 1/2 or 4/8 of an inch. The deviation uniform profile either than rail misordering 62 feet chorded may not be more than 3 inches, 2 3/4 inches, 2 1/4 inches, and this is graded up to 6 to 2 inches, 1 1/2 and 1/2, or 1 1/4 and 1/2. The deviation designated elevation spirals may not be more than 1 3/4, 1 1/2, 1 1/4, 1 inch, 3/4, 1 1/8, 1 2/2. The variation across level spirals in any 31 feet it may not be more than 2 inches, 1 3/4, 1 1/4 inch, 1 1/2, 3/4 inch, 1/2. The deviation of zero cross levels at any point of the tangent designated elevation curves and between spirals may not be more than 3 inches, 2 inches, 1 3/4 inch, 1 1/4 inch, 1 inch, and 1 1/2 inch. The difference in cross level between two are point of the 62 feet apart of the tangent curve and between the spirals and may not be more than 3 inches, 2 inches, 1 3/4 inch, 1 1/2, 1 1/4 inch, 1 inch, and 3/16. 213 103 101. Subpart D, track structure. 213 scope. The subpart prescribes the minimum requirements of the ballast cross ties, track assembly fittings, and physical conditions. 213. The ballast generally and otherwise structural supported and must be supported by material which is transmitted, distributed, loaded, and track railroad rolling equipment to the subgrade, restraining the track laterally, longitude, vertically under the dynamic loads imposed to the railroad rolling equipment. Thermal stress exerted by the rails provided adequate drainage for the trackage, maintain proper track cross level surfaces alignment. 213. Ballaster disturbed track. The track is disturbed as a person designated under the 213.7 and shall examine the track to determine whether or not the ballast is sufficiently compacted, and before the functions described as 213.103, the person is making the examination considers it necessary to, in the interest of safety, operation speed, and distributed and segmented the track and reduce the speed that he is considered safe. 213 and 109. Cross tie the spot. Cross tie being made any material the rail to which the rail may be securely fastened. The material is capable of holding the rails to the gauge within the limits of prescribed in 213.53, and within the distributing load of the rails of ballast section. A timber cross tie is considered defective when it is broken through, split, otherwise impaired. Extend to the hold of spikes with all ballast and work through. So the deteriorated the tie plate of the base railway can move literally more than 1/2 of relatively the cross tie. Cut out of the tie plate through more than 40% of the thickness. Supported joint X, Y, and Z not spiked as required in 213.127. The timber cross ties are used each 39 feet of track supported by non-defective ties. See as the fourth is the following table. Class of track 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Minimum number of non-defective ties per 30 feet of track. 5 and maximum distance between indefected ties and center to the center inches 100. 2 and 3 8 set by 70 inches. 4 and 5 12 by 48 inches. 5 14 and 48 inches. D if the timber is used in minimum numbers of non-defective under rail joint and relatively and the joint are described in the following charter. The letter and charter corresponds to the letter underneath the ties of each type of joint depicted. Suspended at X and Y. Class of track 1. Minimum number of non-defective ties under the joint X, Y, and Z. supported and suspended in XY 123 Y and XY 4 5 6 3 and 3 XY and Z and X and Y, except for the emergency for the temporary installation of not more than 6 months duration. Cross ties may be not interlaced to make the place of switch ties as amended to the 38 FNR 875 January 5, 1973. 213 defective rails when owner of the track and within the part applies to learn through the inspection otherwise than the rail of the track contains the defects of the following table. A person designated in 213 shall be determined in the continuing determines that the track may continue in use in operation over the defective rail if it is not permitted until the rail is replaced. The remedial action prescribed in the table is initiated. The defect is a transverse flusher and is going to % of the railhead of the cross-section area weakened by the defect is less than 30 or more than B. In the defective less than replaced to take the remodelable actions prescribed and noted compound features are less than 30 by B and 100 by 30 B and also 100 by A. Detail fracture 30 by C and engine burn fracture 100 by 30 D. Defective weld 100 A and E and H. Horizontal split head O and 2 and H and F. 3 and 4 I and G. 4 B. Vertical split head break out of the rail head A. Split web O and 1.5 and H and F piped 1.5 and 3 inches I and G. The pipe rail 1.5 by 3 by 1 I and G, 3 and B, headed web separation, break out of the rail head A, O and 1/2 of H and 5, 1/2 and 1/2 I and 1 and O. Bullet holes 1 and 1/8 B, break out of the rail head A, broken base O and 6 and E and I, 6, replace and all, original break A and E. Damage C. Assigned to the person designated under 213 visual supervisors of each operation will own a defective lower rail B, the limited operation of 10 miles per hour over defective rail applying the joint bar bolted through the outermost has been detected 30 days after it's determined and to continue the trackage in the case of classes 3 of 6 track operating speed of the defective rail of 30 miles an hour unit angle over the applied therefore the limit speed of 50 per miles per hour maximum allowable speed of 213.9 is the class track considered whichever the lower D apply the bolted through the outermost defective within the 10 days of determined continue to track limit operation speed over the defective rail to 10 miles per hour unit angle bars and are implied that the limit speed of 50 miles per hour maximum allowable speed is 213 by 9 class of the track consider whichever the lower E of deploying the joint bars in defective accordance to 213 120 D and E inspected rail 90 days determined continuing the track and the use G inspected 30 days determined continuing the track use H limited operation defective to the 50 miles per hour maximum allowable speed over 213.8 and class of track concern within which is class of track concern which is in the lower. B, if the rail classes 3 and C and track class 2, the passenger train operates evidences any of the conditions listed in the following table. Remedial action prescribed in table and must be taken. Remedial action condition is designation under the 237 point determination whether that can recondition requires rail to be replaced. If a person designated under 213 and 7 determined that the condition does not require a rail to be replaced. Shelley spotted head checks, engine burns, but not fracture, milt detected, and a limited speed of 20 miles per hour to each railroad, and inspection of the rails for internal defects and internal intervals, and not more than every other month. Mill flaking, silver, corrugated, corroded. Do inspect the rail as intervals of not more than every other month. And is used in the section transverse fissures and means is progressive crosswise fractures, starting crystal center nucleus inside of the head, which is spread out of smooth bright and dry bright and dark, round, overall surface, substantial right angle, the length of the rail, distinguished features of the transverse fissure of the other types of fractures, defects, and crystalline center of nucleus, and nearly smooth surface of the development which surrounds it in compound fissure, means of progressive fracture originating in horizontal split head of the turn ups and down, and the rail is in smooth and bright and dark surfaces, progressing substantially at the right angle of the length of the bar rail and compounded with fissures require an examination of both faces of fracture to locate the horizontal split in which they originate. 3. The horizontal split head means the horizontal progressive defective originated inside of the railhead, usually 1/4 inch more than below the running surface of progressing horizontal in all directions, generally accompanied in flat spot of the running surfaces and defective as the crank lengthwise rail, and when it reaches the side of the railhead, vertical split head means the vertical splits through the near and middle head of the extending it through it and crack and rut streak and may show under the head of closing web casing and be split out of the side of the head. Split web means the lengthwise crank along the side of the web extending out of the into and through it. And pipe rail means that the vertical split rail usually is webbed due to failure to inside the shrinkage. Cavity and ingot unite rolling. Broken base means more than broken in the base rail. Detailed fracture, progressive fracture, originating in nearly surface of the railhead. These fractures should not be confused with transverse fissures and compound fissures and other defects within internal origins. And detailed fractures arise shelly spots and head checks and flaking. Engine burning fracture means is a progressive fracture originating spots of driving wheels having slipped on the top of the railhead into developing downward, frequently reassembly compounded in transverse fissures in which they should be not confused or classified. Ordinary break and means of partial and complete break in which they do not assign as a fissure in which they known on the defects that are described in paragraph as are found. Flat, unbalanced wheels and slipping similar causes shelly spots between the means of conditioning within a thin and usual 3/8 of an inch depth and less shall be the piece of surface metal flake becomes related to the parent metal in the railhead of a generally gauge corner of evidence black spot appearing from the railhead over the zone of separation of the piece of metal breaking completely leaving a shell cavity of railhead. In the case of the same shell, there may be the surface evidence of the existence shall be in the parent only as after the rail is broken in section. Head and checks may be fine and cracks and appear in the gauge corner of the railhead. Any of the angle with the length of the rail when not readily invisible in presence of the checks of the detector by the raspy feeling of the sharp edges. Flaking may be shallow. Make shallowing. Flakes of the surface metal, generally not more than 1/4 of an inch in length, one width of the break of the gauge of the corner of the railhead. Alright, we're stopping at 213, part 4, 121. Alright, sorry. Chapter 2, Federal Railroad Administration.